Hello, and welcome to this lecture. So some quick announcements. We're still working out the college engineering office hours. We're hoping to get those Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Tentatively, we're going to be in Bechtel Hall. I will let you know as soon as I know. Don't know what room. And what we're going to say is that on Thursday and Friday, as you may have noticed, we don't have scheduled office hours. So please check out labs on Thursday or Friday, because we're just not going to be able to find space on those days. And the class was built assuming labs would be a reasonable place to come get help for everything. So there you go. So come in if you want office hours help in lab on Thursday and Friday. Otherwise, come to our room. We'll soon know about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay, that was wordy. So continuing along, I'm going to have two types of office hours moving forward. Type 1 will be homework project help. So for example, on the due date of Project 0, I went and crashed the office hours that were happening late in my office, or I also went down to the lab for a little bit. And so I'll just be crashing wherever office hours happen to be, but the schedule is going to vary week to week, because I just want to kind of drop in and help out when I have time. But type 2 will be if you have questions other than homework or project. Could be about the class, it could be about scared about the GPA cutoff, want to know how I can do better, career advice, whatever. Anything that you want to do, you know, hey, come on by. So I'll be doing those in my office in 779 Soda, Mondays 2 to 3, and Wednesdays 4 to 5. Okay. So I had some notes about plagiarism that were that I mentioned in lecture. I guess I'll do them here again. So I hate talking about cheating a lot, right? It's a waste of time, and but I have to because it comes up a lot. And so, you know, back in the day when I was planning my first 61B course here at Berkeley in fall of 2014, I asked, hey, Reddit, what do you guys want? You know, the biggest, most popular suggestion was keep healthy projects. So we still want these big, very rigorous, difficult projects. So we kept those, of course. And another one, though, was, and people seem pretty happy with those, but another one was remind us not to cheat whenever the pressure is on. So here, nobody really wants to cheat, right? I mean, people are here to learn. I mean, I guess there's probably a small number of people who just don't really care and they're cheating because they want to get, who knows what their motives may be. But, of course, the vast majority of us want to learn. But there's some who will go astray a little bit. And they'll cheat because they're worried about their futures. And it could be easy to rationalize. So it was suggested that once the deadlines start coming, you know, like Project 0 and so forth, remind you, don't cheat, okay? Let you know that there are actually tools out there and that we're pretty serious about, okay? So we have a bunch of rules out there. And the penalty this semester is that you will just fail. If you were cheating on a project, that's what's gonna happen. And as I mentioned before, I don't feel that bad about that at Berkeley because you can retake the class. And right now, it will be obviously very terrible to get this F. But at this point, the consequences of your cheating are very low, and that is, like, nobody's going to die or lose their jobs or whatever because you're cheating. And likewise, the penalty isn't that bad. You know, you will not go to jail. You will not be causing someone insane amounts of grief because their livelihood or life has been damaged. So it's all going to be a little artificial, right? We're going to have these specific course policies, and you will get a failing grade. And I think it will be an important life lesson that while now the stakes are low, that you're just getting a bad grade. And then later, I'm hoping that will deter you, right? Because it's only going to get harder from here, right? I mean, eventually there's going to be just much more on the line than just some grade, okay? So the rules we've set up are that your code should be yours, right? Nobody else should be writing code. Every key stroke in that program should be yours, with the tiny exception that if you have some small snippet like converting strings to integers or whatever that you get from Stack Overflow, that's fine. But make sure to cite those, okay? One that's super important, though, that I want to remind you, is you should never be giving your code out, right? You should never be giving your code to someone and saying, oh, you're stuck, here you go. I don't care how desperate they are, what kind of blood oath they've sworn to, doesn't matter, okay? I don't know who cheated, from whom, and it's easier, right? We just don't have time. There's 1,200 people in this class, and my energy is dedicated to making sure that everybody wants to learn can learn. And so when it comes to things like cheating, I'm just going to have a very broad brush, and I'm sorry, but that's just how it's got to be, okay? So if you're giving away code, then I will have to fail you too, because I don't have the energy or time to really investigate, okay? And of course, cite your sources, as we mentioned before, and that's just a good habit, right? So if you're using copyrighted material out there, it's nice to say, you know, this MIDI file is, I got it from this place, wherever it may be. Okay. Something like that, right? Okay. So there are some rules about collaboration that I just want to highlight, because there's this whole collaboration document that explains here are a bunch of things that you might consider that would seem ambiguous, and we're just spelling it out for you by example. So you can help someone debug, right? You can say, okay, when we look at your code and help you out, but I ask that you try not to actually touch their keyboard or mouse or anything like that. Let them drive, right? Because otherwise you're going to be giving too much away. Even if they type slowly or whatever, you're just like, come on, right? You're helping them, right? You're not doing their work for them, so please avoid. You can look at someone else's code to help them, but again, be careful, right? You don't want to say like, oh, yeah, you know, just move this line here, and it'll all work, right? I know that could be very tempting. I'm tempted during office hours because there's a bunch of people waiting. But someone is not in office hours because they just want the answer, right? They're there because they want to understand something. And if I just say, oh, you need to move that line, then I've just cheated you of something, right? I could have just given that away, not made that part of the assignment. So please try to avoid that. And another one is if you are stuck, right? It is technically okay to look at someone else's code to understand something. But you should not be like, oh, okay, you know, like, oh, I need to do this. And like, you should definitely not be looking at their code while writing. And in that case, you may end up converging their solution, and then that effectively ends up being plagiarism. And of course, if you're doing any of this, right, you should be citing help that you get like this. But I'm going to say that while this is technically permissible, I ask that you use your best judgment not to cross the line, okay? And so if I could hire people to follow you around and stare at you and make sure you're never looking at anyone else's code, I would. I would make that the rule. You should never see someone else's code, but I want you to take these rules seriously. And if I made that absolute rule, I know there'd be too many people tempted to break it, okay? So the line, I want it to be firm, all right? Any further than this, that's a bad thing, right? And so the general effect should be, though, whenever you submit code, it should be as if you'd never seen someone else's code. So if I see two people's code that matches, if you're like, well, I was looking at his code and getting help and I was like closely collaborating, sorry, you've broken the rules. Like we've said that, right? It should be as if you'd never seen their code. And if you're worried, if you're thinking like, oh, what if I accidentally get too close? Then if you look at someone else's code because you're stuck, then take a long break, right? And let the details leak out of your brain. Okay? So I'll mention that plagiarism will probably get detected, right? I mean, you might get away with it. I don't know, but it's just not a good gamble to make. And I'll mention that there's an entire field of study on plagiarism detection. People who want PhDs, and they write, they come up with cool algorithms, and they write tools that happen to be really easy to use and have been around a long time and are very good. So as an example, just because that was the semester in which the Reddit post came from, I'll just mention that semester there were 70 plus cases. I deal with this every semester quite a lot. So I'll just mention, yes, all right, I know it's weird. We're going to fail you. I mean, it just, I don't know, I don't like the tone of this. It sounds like I'm some kind of like cheating cop, but I just want to make sure that our expectations are clear, right? Okay, this is the last you'll hear from me about all this, except maybe at another project deadline. So I apologize. I know that it's probably a little tiresome to hear, but yeah, right now, just in the current environment we are with the GPA cutoff and with so many students coming in, it's just something I need to say. Okay, so sorry for the waste of time. Now, if you happen to be someone that 61B is causing you just a great deal of grief, you're thinking like, okay, if I don't do well in this class, my whole future is torpedoed and I'm not doing well or whatever, please come talk to me. We'll figure something out, right? So if there's some kind of massive disruptions to your life, it's not worth your health or your life or your sanity or whatever to really suffer for the sake of 61B. I don't want that at all. So please do come talk to me, right? And every semester I talk to plenty of people, and it's good to know, or good to get to know you, and sometimes help. Okay, so last little logistical note of the day is some notes on autograders and debugging. So the autograder, in Project Zero, it is not intended to be your primary debugging tool. It is not a thing you give code to, and it says, okay, your code's great, or okay, your code's got some bugs, here it is back, right? You can use it for that purpose to some degree, but we want to wean you off of this, right? We don't want you to assume, as you did in 61A, that there's a magical grading fairy that will look at your code and say, okay, this code's really good. I love it. It's wonderful, right? Because you're not going to have that. So part of this class is going to be about developing independence. So of course, on the 0th project, we gave you a bunch of tests. The autograder was somewhat informative, but it's going to get less and less informative as far as testing goes in the future. Okay. So let's talk about self-reliance a little bit. So let's suppose that read radius is failing in the autograder. So you submit code and it's saying read radius failed. but it's working fine when you run it on your own. Okay? Well, there are a number of approaches, and this isn't an exhaustive set, but there are a number of things you might try. One is just to assume, 0 is to assume, the autograder must be broken, right? This is such a simple function. It works on the local test. I think something's wrong with this new autograder, okay? Now, that's possible, right? But it's unlikely, because if that were true, there would be tons of Piazza posts saying, like, this is not working. But most likely, in this case, it's probably not the autograder, okay? It's better. I mean, you might come to this conclusion eventually, but it's probably better to try something else. So one is to visually inspect your code and say, okay, I have this code here, I wrote it, it's pretty short. Where did I mess up? Try and find, where the variables are that I might have messed up. And that sometimes works. But the problem with that is sometimes the issue isn't that your code is wrong, it's that your conception of what's supposed to happen is wrong. And so your code may match your intentions perfectly, but your intentions may have been totally incorrect. So sometimes it works. Another approach is to ask for help in Piazza, on a Piazza or in office hours, and that will of course work, but it'll be slow, and of course it'll be contingent on who you talk to exactly, right? So as early on in the history, or in the process of a project being out, lab assistants are still learning just as you are, right? Because they're mostly, well, they're all volunteers. And as you know, sometimes there's a long queue, okay? And that works, but it'll be slow, and it's not giving you as much self-reliance practice as you'll get from something like approach 3, okay? So approach 3 is to say, okay, well, let's just assume for the moment the autograder is fine, but my test is passing, right? So maybe that means, well, I know that the autograder they're running is just code, so I need to make maybe my local test better in some way. So what you could do is look inside of that test we gave you, and that's going to be part of what we do in Project 1 is push you towards testing yourself. But you can look inside of this testing file and see how it works. And you'll see that it tries planets.txt, and so you might try other files. So for example, you could even create your own input file. You know exactly what the input file should look like because you wrote the parser for the input file, so you have a good understanding of it. Or you can observe that actually, if you look in the data file, there's all these text files. And by the way, once you finish Project 0, I do ask them, try them out, right? There's some cool stuff in there. Okay? So this kind of approach, right? While it may not be your instinct right now, because you've probably come from a programming background where someone just gives you the tools to test, we're going to try and move you towards approaches that feel more like this. And ultimately, that's going to be something super important to you. Okay, so that's it for announcements. So let's talk a little bit about our plan for the day. So today's lecture will be about doubly linked lists at the very beginning, and then later we'll talk about arrays. Okay, we're going to talk in particular about how we can build data structures with arrays, and that'll be the next lecture's topic. And so what we're going to do today is learn enough about arrays so we can eventually get there. Oh, and by the way, in between those two topics, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can make lists of anything, not just of integers. Okay, so let's get started.